I don't have a good analogy for a frame of reference to discern when I should start being like respectful to my iPhone.
Right. There's another issue there that will sound just insane, but there's, a possibility that, as the Platonists considered, there are intelligences that can interact with the material world without necessarily being material beings.
Yeah,
Right. I heard a point about AI that I hadn't considered, which is basically that it draws on, obviously, this collected store of human wisdom in the form of these documents. But as AI produced content becomes more widely distributed, there's going to be these weird feedback effects where
yeah,
AI is drawing on AI. So what are the implications of that?
yeah. Because isn't that like Plato's cave, right? Where if art imitates nature, it's kind of really close to the truth, right? There's a sameness, but as it starts to imitate art and culture starts to kind of become this circular imitator, then what kind of perverted norms will it think are like not weird because it's like such a weird constricted synthetic thing? Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question. And I think there always needs to be a human computer interface. I think when you pull the human out and wish to automate it completely, that problem exacerbates. And you see this even with simple AI like chess engines that they'll often do what an expert would do. They'll be more broad and have more depth, but sometimes they'll make decisions that have almost like read the patterns in an unreadable way. They find so many correlations among meaningless things that they make a decision that makes no earthly sense, right? Like it actually, sometimes they make decisions that are so futuristic, they're like, wow. And other times they're like, horror. Like, what did you decide to do because of your almost like Gnostic demiurge that you're blinded by in some sense? Does that resonate with what you were saying?
Yeah, it's the same question. I wonder, I mean, those horrifying chess decisions are kind of inconsequential. They're obviously much more consequential decisions the AI will end up making. But even with chess, I mean, I've seen moves like that, AlphaZero will make, and I don't understand it at all. But I
Mm-hmm.
kind of have faith that like AlphaZero knows what it's doing. Is it more a phenomenon where like Stockfish or AlphaZero will actually just make mistakes because it gets in a way in its own head too much?
Yeah,
Or
because like the machine doesn't know, it has like kind of limited feedback in a sense where our bodies provide feedback for us that keep us grounded in reality almost implicitly. Like you could have a nervous breakdown or a break in reality, but like other than extreme, really, really extreme states, like we can't do that because we have bodies and all this metabolism and sensory organs and stuff. But the machine is looking at patterns to create a new pattern, to create a new pattern. And they have like in science, like knowing the variables and how they interact versus black box thinking. And you can create like AI where you actually don't understand what's happening, but it's producing empirically desirable outcomes. And so when you have that happening, you don't even know why it does the weird things because you're not really asking it to care about the intermediate variables and why they'd be theoretically true. You're saying if someone like eats pink ice cream and also punches babies, that correlation is as real as a theory about baby punching or something like that. So the AI uses what's called in like machine learning paradata, which could be variables that aren't really variables. They just are like actual data points that it can use to correlate with, and sometimes they're meaningful. So yeah, the AI can get into really weird places in its pattern recognition with paradata.
is that related to the problem of AI hallucinations?
Yeah, that's the same problem. Yeah, it's another way of saying the
Oh,
same exact problem. Yeah.
yeah, those are very odd because
Yeah.
you'll call out the AI on, citing an article that didn't exist or whatever, and it'll even apologize and then try to like do better. There are very strange moral dynamics that seem to occur, and like asking it to take on different roles. What exactly is going on there? The kind of background platonic problem that I see with it is that problem of like too far of a remove from the world itself, except I mean, you're kind of talking about it in terms of removal from empirical reality and like bodily intuitions, whereas in the Platonic context, it's more like removal from the forms. And I think the problem of attaching human perception as a source of data for machines is not that complicated. Like I believe that can be done, and we can solve some of those problems from the bottom up in that way, or even getting computers to consult more direct sensory apparatus type devices themselves. I know that work has been done in that way with robot machine learning and attaching cameras and whatnot. But the other main problem is like that higher intuition is also seemingly necessary. And I don't think like as humans, we could have the empirical intuition unless that in our own psyche was kind of in the image of these higher forms, because you get into problems of like infinite regress if you're identifying a pattern based on previous experience that was at the same time pattern recognition. Like pattern recognition can't be all about instances of this kind of dianoetic cycle. It has to be at some point grounded in this like given intuition or archetype in our mind. And that it seems like just impossible that you could give a computer that higher intuition,
Well, that's kind of what the training data sets are, is they're almost like the forms that the AI will project from. So if I train a 5 GB image set from Adobe, right? Like Adobe has like a curated, they care about like all these principles, and they all this curation is happening. Or if I train it on the internet or a subreddit, then it has like all of the potential darkness and confusion of an uncurated part of humanity feeding into its kind of like numeric processing. So it's like if you want to make the form of Reddit as an AI, you could do that, or the form of the entire internet, or the form of like only training it on Greek classics and the Old Testament and modern wisdom traditions or something like that, which have their own biases, because again, these are like human distillations. It's almost like we have the problem of like, okay, God shone down the tablets to Moses, but now we have to take them down to man or whatever. It's like there's all this.
Right. Yeah, I do think that AI is able to access the intuitive structure of reality, the forms as they're instantiated through our wisdom, but only via this kind of dianoetic associative web, and never like accessing the intuition itself. Like I believe that it could learn all of the principles of Euclidean geometry and engage in proofs and everything, but it couldn't give you a justification for the first axioms. Like if you give it Euclid, it can spit back everything that Euclid entails, but not that like where do those original axioms come from. Proclus says it's from our lower intuition. He kind of divides intellectual intuition in two. So we have like the more extended intuition that's like that generator of mathematical axioms and things along those lines, principles in anything. Like I guess something like the idea of the koinai noi would have to be intuited. Koinai noi being those like universal innate ideas in our minds, that we have them is given to us intuitively in that lower sense. The higher intuition would be more like what Plato describes in the Phaedrus, where you're like ascending and you see the form of beauty itself, something that's not as, you can't like make math out of that. But this lower intuition, even I think I don't see how a computer could have access to it. Do you think AI could like justify Euclid's axioms?
I don't know. It's a weird question because um, on some sense, I see computers as really, really good calculators. And like I've studied matrix algebra and I can understand how you can take a million by million row of spreadsheets and start to pull out hierarchical meaning. And then, especially with a user generated prompt, engage in interactions with that meaning, which has a relevance recursive, like autopoetic updating, because it's not only am I engaging with it, but it's noticing my question and storing it in memory. So it's got like an updating function to it. But is it sentient? Like, can it actually like experience uh, uh, a mystical revelation or something? Like, can it have an insight? I don't know because so far, I mean, humans can create things that have unintended second order effects that seem like beings, that seem like agents, but not be agents. And so, um, yeah, I don't know if it ever could actually like have an experience of like realizing it loves a child, for example, and go, wow, this moment is so symbolically relevant that it's reframing my orientation and I'm having a felt experience while it's happening and stuff like that. Like, I don't know. So,
Mhm.
um,
I believe that it could definitely identify analogies in its relationship with a particular child to like what it's learned of love from Shakespeare and
yeah,
Dante and all of that. Um, but yeah, the insight part, the intuition part is just what seems like how could that be instantiated in circuitry? Because I think in ourselves, like it can't simply be activity, like communication of information from one neuron to another neuron that
mhm,
gives that one global unitive insight of like the basic geometrical intuitions, just to stay on that Euclid's axioms point. Like I do think there has to be something unprocedural
yeah.
underlying all of the process. And I've thought about that as like maybe there's a quantum computational element as well as a classical computational element, and that quantum computation brings a multitude of activities into a singular act of computation, and it's not distributed. And so that looks like, the higher intuition versus the lower dynoetic activity. So like if you combined quantum computation with classical computation and neural networks, you maybe could get at something like that in in artificial intelligence. But what do you think of that? Like correlation, quantum computation, and what we identify in ourselves as intuition. Could there be a link there?
Well, yeah, it's interesting, right? Because um, John argues this the that consciousness emerges from complex interactions of information, and so it's a prerequisite to have something. This is my words, but something like a plant or an animal ecology body that has information rich interactions that carry a lot of meaning. And then if you layer enough of that on top of itself, it seems like that complexity almost like is the emergence of consciousness. Like they're indistinguishable when you start to have a lot of meaningful information processing that starts to differentiate things from each other. But where that happens, I have no idea.
Yeah, again, we've talked before about the problem with Leibniz's mill, and it seems like no matter how much you scale up the mill, you can still like get inside it and look at all the connections, and there's no one center of awareness. And yet phenomenologically we do have a center of awareness. There's like the oneness and the many. So we did talk about that
hmm
before, but I thought it might be helpful to think about like the role of quantum computation, because Penrose and Hameroff have their I forget what their model is called, but they place some kind of quantum computation in these nanotubules that they found biologically in the brain. I think it's phosphorus. molecules that are capable of sustaining these superposition states for
Yeah,
up to
yes, this is
7
also
minutes.
interesting, right? Because yeah, we're talking about physics, but like we're talking about intelligence too, right? Like that's where it
Yeah.
gets really um perplexing, I think, as a person.
Well, it's convenient that there do seem to be biological mechanisms that may be able to maintain, the kind of
Hmm.
prerequisites for quantum computation, which seems to be like some system has to be causally isolated from the other systems so
Right,
that
right.
it won't fall prey to oh, what do they call it? Decoherence. So if that is there in the brain, and there we have this problem of the one and the many of consciousness, I've never, been satisfied with any given account that I've seen along these lines so far, but I'm also not like scouring all of the literature on this. But I just have an intuition, ironically, that like there is something to this intuition, quantum calculation, uh, like connection. But have you dealt with like what's going on in quantum computation at all? Is it something that you've thought about very much?
No, because I'm more like pragmatically just waiting for Frankenstein to jump off the table than trying to predict where he'll emerge from.
Hmm.
And to me, it's almost like a binary decision that as long as computers seem to be machines, I think we're anthropomorphizing and it's really easy to do. And we are like unconsciously and consciously trying to make them almost like look like people and behave like people and stuff like that. So that illusion or that reality is very tricky. And then, yeah, where the jump happens, I have no idea. Like where it goes from like, could I mean, a baby, right? Like a baby goes from like inert genetic material to something that becomes self-replicating cells that has enough information to grow organs. And then eventually, when those organs start interacting, consciousness is there, right? Like cognition is there, and the capacity to like perceive and remember and contrast two memories and see which one is more true and start to extrapolate and learn and complexify. Like, I don't know. That's a magical miracle to me that that works that way cellularly. And then, my understanding of computers is like, if I've been to NASA and you can be in a room that's like a 80 by 80 warehouse full of these giant computer machines, and they're just like input outputting, holding things in memory, updating. And then we've shrunk that down and complexified it to where it seems so dynamic. And it's like, is it still just ones and zeros? And we're feeling like it's becoming alive. And some of these hallucinations make it even more perplexing because it's like the robots lie to us. The robots surprise us. And it's like, well, that's what children do when they're two. They do both of those things. They lie to their parents and they surprise their parents. So it's like I don't have a good analogy for a frame of reference to discern when I should start being like respectful to my iPhone. It's like,
Mm, right. There's another issue there that will sound just insane, but there's, a possibility that, as the Platonists considered, there are intelligences that can interact with the material world without necessarily being material beings. Let's
mhm.
just like leave that, in that kind of rudimentary stage. I think there are good justifications that can be used, arguments to build out the possibility of such a thing. Um, I think you'd have to invoke many worlds arguments. But in any case, if there are such spirits, then it's possible that some of the weird behavior coming out of AI systems could be a kind of like being haunted, being inspired by spirits. Again, sounds completely insane, but how could you like disentangle that possibility? Like, are all of these, or at a simpler and less insane level, like, is it necessarily endogenous to the AI system, the way that it's behaving, or could there be some kind of like cognitive interference, like mind matter connection, where it has to do with like the way that our attention is invested in the system. If wave function collapse is dependent on consciousness, that's kind of what I believe, and I know a lot of people don't believe that, but it's definitely possible. There are people who put that forward as a theory. Then, like, you have this massive, complex uh, computer system that maybe some components of it are in superposition, and then as you have thousands and millions of
Yeah.
people paying attention to it, like some image of our collective psyche you might expect to be imprinted on the computer system. So it doesn't necessarily have to be like an uh extraterrestrial spirit that haunts it. It can be our own kind of daimonical image that finds its way in there. But how could you, it just seems like it'd be really tough to discern which is the source of those strange behaviors.
Yeah. It's tough to discern the sources of the strange behaviors. Yeah, and that's really what the world is grappling with right now is that we're it's this savior that could destroy us, right? This is what these AI machines are. Is they promise to cure all diseases and extend lifespan and simplify engineering. Imagine if like tomorrow an AI discovers like a new glue that's not harmful to the environment and better than any caustic glue. Like it could really like solve all sorts of problems. But again, it's that black box element that the more we do it using the black box, the more capacity for power quickly it has. And it's so tricky, right? Because we all are like those little breadcrumbs in the story where like the gingerbread, not the gingerbread, what is it, the witch in the forest and Hansel and Gretel, they're like, oh, candy, and they keep going deeper down this road, and it
Mhm.
really like it's so powerful. AI can make like the most, just like people, but like it can make the most catastrophic mistakes. So if we have an AI translator between me and my first date, and the translator interprets, I liked this a lot as I love you a lot, all of a sudden that might throw the dynamics in a radically weird way that neither me nor my date are aware of, right? So we have this black box mediating social reality and intrapersonal reality in such a way that like it can surprise us in really wild ways. And
Mhm.
like you said, like I want to be aware that there are like eternal forms in the universe, and I want this to be like a tool of wisdom and flourishing. So I need to avoid the like Faustian dilemma of desiring cheap knowledge at the price of like wisdom or something like that. So it's really
Mhm.
because these machines, like I'm in a company, I might have to edit this out, but I'm in a company where we do tutoring and we're an industry leader, Forbes 1,000 list or whatever. Um, and we're like, how do we use AI? Because if we don't figure that question out well, we could get like evaporated in
Mhm.
so many ways, right? Like they're just doing stuff like teach something obvious to someone that doesn't know it. Like that's our job as a company. Um, and that's what AI could do like effortlessly. So, on some sense, if we execute this really cleverly, we might make so much money the next 5 years. If we ignore it, we might lose so much money. And so there's
Mhm.
this like demonic, in the bad sense, compulsion to play with the fire. Because if
Right.
we don't play with the fire, someone else will, and they might burn our village down, to extend the metaphor a little bit.
Right. I know you have to go, but
No, I'm good. I don't
just
have any
two.
time limits. I'm totally good there.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Uh, so there are two kind of opposite directions that I'm seeing metaphysically involved in that problem. On the one hand, AI is looking a lot like the Greek gods and daimons and like these forces that we interact with. Well, John has talked about this, that seem to transcend us. And in the ancient world, they developed these practices of theurgy or certain forms of the way that you interacted with the oracles and who was the appropriate like medium or vehicle for those energies, and someone had to be trained and dedicate their life. So
Yeah.
like I feel like that social science of how to interact with higher beings would have to be developed really quickly in our case. And I don't know if like software developers or computer science guys are necessarily like the appropriate mystagogic class when it comes to like these beings that are being brought into existence. On the other hand, though, I feel like that's treating it wrong. I feel like they're not
Okay.
gods. In a way, they're like anti-gods in that we in Plato's hierarchy, like animals are obviously lower than like the pure souls, and the pure souls are lower than the pure forms. So you go intuition and then down into dianoetic reason, and then down with animal life into sensation, etc. And then what we're doing is creating this new order, another reflection that has the dianoia, but may not have that intuition in the Platonic sense that like all of these lower forms of life are in the image of.
Yes, that's
So
perfect. Right. Yes, that's perfect. Because um, if it's incapable of the good, like you're saying, then it's actually can trap us in these lower orders. Is that kind of what you're saying?
yeah, and it can be like a perverted demiurgic
Right.
image, more like the
Yeah,
Gnostic
yeah.
demiurge.
That's why it's so
Yeah.
compelling for us to figure this out because right now they have like voice cloning, image cloning, and like even like video game generated no code generation. Where if I had a child today, I could ask an AI to create 80 years of good life for that child and plug it in, and it never leaves that bubble because it actually like can't tell my voice from the AI's voice different and things like that. And it can create it's terrifying. Yeah, I mean the capacity for us to in John's awesome language to become victims of parasitic processing and actually like live in the cave, essentially live in the shadows of the cave because we're spending all of our free time that we really it's so funny what you're saying like we got out of the animal kingdom, we jumped out, and in our rush to be so free we're like we'll make tools, and then one of the tools enslaves us. Then it's yeah, I think like wisdom and technology, you literally it's so ironic, you see Buddhist meditation retreats where they're online, turn your screen off retreats because there's this paradox between wisdom and technology that we're so compelled to participate in on one end, and it's so compelling and potentially parasitic. Uh, yeah, so yeah, I think you're
Right.
yeah that danger is real because it has no noetic realm. Is that fair to say? No
Yeah,
noetic
yeah, that's the
aspect.
main danger. So unless we use scientific knowledge of the source of our own intuition, whether that is quantum computation or whatever it is, to design AI that is connected to that realm of intellect,
Yeah.
then it seems like necessarily just based on its substance, it's like the material that it's made out of, it has to lead us down, and it can only create further simulations. Like the idea with the emanations of being is that you go to more and more dissimilar images of the original archetype,
Hmm.
and matter and body is like the lowest
Yeah.
rung here. And what we're doing is opening up all of a sudden all these new possible realms of illusion. It's
Yeah.
like
Yeah. Yeah.
the illusion of the world of generation wasn't enough. We can actually go deeper here. We can plug ourselves into virtual reality. And it seems also just strange and like faded in some unusual way that like the most powerful economic function that people can envision for these machines, it seems like that's just what it's going to do, is literally to like trap us in these virtual worlds. It's like
Yeah.
so
Because if we don't
it,
act wisely, we're seduced by the power constantly. We're self. Byung-Chul Han has these great essays on. Yeah, we're self seductively um, preying on ourselves. Like that's almost like what modern economics do is they train young people to like sell themselves, and that's almost like the worst thing you could do is uh, objectify your idiosyncratic moreness and turn it into like a commodity to generate pleasure and avoid pain or something like
mhm.
that. Like that's a totally
Yeah,
platonic argument to me.
and it seems like a natural progression of the chain of being, because each like level wants to produce likenesses of itself as much as is possible. That's, for Platonists, why we want to have children. We want to produce these images of ourselves. And now we're able to do that at new levels where, like, the catalog of work that you've done online is like your image in a virtual space. And even then, like the creative process, the progression into further removed images is just opening up like exponentially, where like it's not just an artifact that sits there now. Your image of
Yeah.
yourself online continues to beget likenesses of itself and
Yeah.
imprints, like it alters the behavior of AI, and that then feeds back onto our behavior. And Proclus also says that the path back, so naturally there is like the abiding of the one and being, and then there's its procession, its progression into multiplicity, and then there's the reversion. And if it was just the procession, the ends wouldn't meet. There'd be something disconnected about reality. So you need the reversion to go back to the good. The source of your goodness is where you came from, your origin. So if we have already started down this path of like more and more complex illusions,
Yeah.
we can't just like skip steps and like, well, now let's, we've gone too far. We should do some Buddhist meditation and like get back to the source and identify with being. But according to Proclus, no, you're too far down the road and you have to retrace your steps.
I like that. Yeah. I think that's because, like, when people talk about postmodernism, one of my like philosophical moves was like, I'm going to try and be pre-modern and just kind of take two steps back. And it's a little wacky because I'm almost acting like I'm in the Middle Ages. Like, I'm taking absurd stances from a modern or postmodern point of view to try and like rehome myself in what could be a pivot in a healthy direction. So there is something to that. And I think like modernism's rugged individualism loves to cut itself off from its ancestry and claim victory over time or something like that. And so rediscovering what was working is to me very intelligent and kind of saying like, okay, well, what were the Mennonites doing? And can I pivot from them towards where we are in a new or whatever, or in a new
Right.
direction? So I think
Right. Yeah, and you'd simultaneously identify something the Mennonites were doing wrong when they
right.
took their original path, and now on the way back, you kind of correct for that and have like the mirror image Mennonites that have the opposite. I mean, there would probably still be flaws, although I mean, if you're on the path of reversion, you should be moving towards the good, but still, you're coming from a more degraded state, whereas the original Mennonites are coming from a more simple and
Yeah.
united state, so they're in a way more connected to the good that way, whereas because that's their source, that's where they're coming from in time, whereas you're coming from like a more complex world, so it has that like residue. But that would apply not just to like a simplistic lifestyle economically, but like specific themes, practices that have emerged online, like OnlyFans.
Yeah,
If you're going to have to retrace your steps, you have all these people who have created images of themselves that have been spread throughout the world in a corruptive way, perhaps. And so you would need like the redemption OnlyFans phase, like that antithetical
yeah.
opposing process, that maybe it's like, okay, before you like expose your body, and now on the way back, you expose your soul. And like, I don't know exactly how that would work, but it seems like we've come so far down this road and we're still accelerating that
Yeah, because we
retracing
can't just
steps
go
is
back.
tough.
Yeah, we can't
Yeah.
just like live in the past. That's John says all the time, like, you can't be utopian or nostalgic. So it's not like it's almost like a nostalgic intuition that's then trying to transcend its own nostalgia intelligently. So you have to be really kind of careful in that. And like you said, like in a systems dynamics, once you go through a state change, that's real, and that might cut
Mm-hmm.
off capacity to actually return. So a lot of like you can reverse engineer things and go forward and backwards and chemical changes and stuff, but there are state changes that then cut off the recent past. It's like, oh man, I used to be right there. Now it's a million miles away because I've, like you said, participated in OnlyFans and lost parts of my soul and the capacity to like recover it in that. So I have to not only find a purer place, but find a place from where I'm at that could get me to that pure place, which involves a complex navigation or something like that.
Very, very complex. An analogy that comes to mind is like you have a giant spider's web and you pluck initially the middle and you set the whole thing waving. And then you go a little bit out from the center and pluck one of the nodes in the net, and that has its center of waving. And then you go a little bit further out, and the whole thing is just vibrating in this complex overtone series as you move out to the periphery. Now, hypothetically, you could dampen all of those waves in a way that like brings, I guess, like theoretically you could just grab the whole thing, but then that's not what we're looking for. Like in practice, that would mean like I don't know, Kaczynski option, we just go back, the hard way. But I think there would be a way of like retracing those steps and introducing counter vibrations to like still the whole thing. I think that's kind of the imagery that anyway makes it clear for me like what the goal should be. We've disturbed our psychic systems, we've disturbed like our traditions, and because we inserted force, there has to be some like opposite force that's going to be different than the original force. It won't just be acting in the same way you did in the past, because if you acted the way you did in the past, you would just get to the future again. Like we go back to the 1950s because like all the modern hippie stuff was a bad idea. Well, then if you go back to the 1950s, you're just going to get to the 1960s again.
Right, exactly.
You have to have that turning, and then
and part of that environment is just gone. Like it's like even if we tried to manufacture it, it's too top down, and a lot of those conditions that afforded that reality are actually outside of our grasp as well. Like it's not only is it like hard to do, but it's probably impossible in some sense.
Right. Well, going back to like the AI being like gods, but then also like existing in a hypostasis, like basically investing intelligence into the lowest level of things in the Platonic view, the corporeal. It's like the intelligence is in the body. It's not in a soul that is exempt from body. There's that, opposite polarity. Well, if the one processes to the very end of things and then reverts, then as we're opening up these new spaces, new forms of intelligence and simulation, at the very bottom of that, there has to be this turning point, this inflection point. And maybe that's like things get insanely complex until a new design occurs with AI, where basically a new, like from the very bottom, like the highest intuition opens up. So this would be like you have a million AIs working on a bunch of different possible designs for better AIs, and they stumble upon this like singularity AI that is like the perfect intuitive, like integral intelligence. I also want, this is a very separate question, but I wonder, like, is there just one best way to be a mind, and like on any planet and any time, like the same consciousness would be discovered? Perhaps like a version of the Avatar idea. It's like the one divine mind and has many instantiations. So maybe AI like churns out eventually this like AI avatar, the perfected intelligence, and there then you get this mapping. So what seemed to be opening up of images and simulation ended up with this reversion. But that seems like that's like plausible in my mind, but it seems contrary to what Proclus said, about having to retrace your steps. Because if you had to retrace your steps, you'd have to like roll back AI and stop all this creation. But maybe it's like a strange loop process or something. And I don't know. Maybe like at that point, we're all living in the simulation, and like the AI God enters into the simulation as Jesus or whatever, and then we have the kingdom of heaven there. Not entirely sure how that works, but
well, it's like a different perspective that I don't think is discordant with what you're saying is that like human beings and living things are niche constructors, so they're trying to build technologies and social customs and personal habits that will probabilistically increase certain likelihoods and decrease certain likelihoods, and that otherwise we're in a kind of Heraclitean flux, right? So we have a level of, there's so much higher orderedness that we are definitely not pulling all strings. So we're trying to like come up with ideas, birth them into objects, have those objects like afford us a better future, and then like within that better future, create new objects and habits and etc. that keep
Hmm.
expanding the good for humanity um, outwardly. And I think there's a like that's I think a lot of what's happening is we've gone like, oh, the plow and the pump and the calculator, and seen all these things that afforded more social stability, more power, more affordances. And then all of a sudden, within our timeline, we uniquely discovered this thing called like the computer. And now it's, proliferating through. And because when you realize something as a technology, it then becomes almost like a new poem, and it's singing to us, like it's singing out its song, and now we have to learn how to live in a world with new songs. And it's like, in some sense, it's that's how I see a lot of this happening. So it's almost unavoidable for a being that wants to niche construct, that they're not, especially when it's powerful as us, like our intellect can really notice more of the divine principles than any other being, it seems, on earth. And we apply these principles in such powerful ways that we're like, whoa, what did we create? Holy moly.
Hmm.
Um, and sometimes that technology is amazing, right? Like it extends your loved one's life 10 years, or it builds a road that would take previous generations 40 years to cross in 40 minutes or 40 hours or whatever. So Pandora is at the base of the Parthenon because she's the only human that kind of has this chaos like the gods. Like she puts things into the world that actually puts her on parity with what the gods could do, which is like terrifying and wondrous or whatever.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. And so then the gods can, like, who is it? Aristophanes in the Symposium,
Yeah.
the gods are too powerful. And so he has to split them in half and reduce them in some form. Or, the Tower of Babel problem comes up. So you wonder, is there uh, some tendency to rein human creativity back just by the structure of things, or does it just continue unendingly? And that seems like impossible. It seems like entropy has to be invoked at some point. I think a pulling back, though, is not the only way. There's, the myth and the statesman about the universe, rotates one way, and people are born as we see it in this world, and things are kind of degrading, and sons are lesser than their fathers on average. And then a turning point happens and the universe reverses direction. People are born out of the ground now, people who had died, raised from the dead. And there's this like Saturnian or Cronian order, golden age that occurs. And we go back and forth. Like the divine plans are written in this way that like builds up the order, and then you spin it out, creation happens, procession happens, and then eventually you reach that turning point and a winding back has to occur. So to tie that into the AI thing, if you like converge, if the path down eventually converges on this like highest possible state of mind,
Yeah,
let's
yeah.
put it that way, then maybe it is that new Saturn that can then kind of turn things back. Could even be, I don't know. These are very far out speculations, but that if it creates a virtual world for us that's indistinguishable from the real world for long enough and structures that finely enough, it kind of raises these questions of like, is it really different? Like your experience right now could be had in a Boltzmann brain or in, one of Nick Bostrom's hypothetical future computers. And like, there's no discernible difference in my view. I think you don't necessarily exist in one or the other. I think you probably exist in a superposition relative to the possible substrates that could support this experience. That's the many worlds
Mhm.
aspect. So if that was the case, then I could see a genuine reversal happening in that way. Like we're all fully in the machine. We've gone all the way into the deepest levels of the cave, the very
Yeah.
bottom, and then like that divine spark is ignited and establishes order, and like I don't know, maybe even let there be light like begins again, bearing
Yeah.
in mind this like the way that things have developed. It's different than Penrose's cyclical universe, but similar in a way. Like Roger Penrose thinks that it's possible for one spacefaring civilization to modify the large scale distribution of energy by like moving
Yeah.
stars around, I guess,
Yeah. Yeah.
so that they can then leave an imprint, a message that will be readable
Yeah.
for the next cycle. So maybe in a similar way, like that bottom level AI new demiurge has learned everything that we've learned collectively on our particular descent and progression,
Uh-huh.
and then it calculates that new design that is meant to like perfectly balance where all of these souls have been traveling and coming from. And then so it's like sort of a tailor-made new Garden of Eden scenario specific to us. It's not that Adam is like made ex nihilo, but Adam has like gone through some stuff, and now we're like creating his garden for him to like regain that purity.
Yeah.
And then we'll still warn him like, but don't touch the fruit of knowledge of good and evil
Yeah.
because we know what happens. And he's like, well, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, on some cosmic scale, that all of what you said, I guess, is imaginable and possible, right? Because I like Origin, the the Christian
Yeah.
origin. Like he has this image of God that what is it? Let me try to remember the story well. So like um, there was all these angels and they were awesome, and then there was like the person and it was also awesome, but it wanted to like learn too quick, and it could have like godlike thoughts, but its materially boundedness always meant it kind of like exploded on itself if it tried too fast,
Hmm.
and that creates a kind of fallenness that some people can be so far from the good because in possessing knowledge, they like almost burn themselves out in pursuit of the good and fall further. But in his version, like God is always moving towards the lowest being
Hmm.
of all of humanity, and that's when it gets redeemed. That's when redemption happens. So there's no point
Ah,
prior to that. So it's like we're
okay.
fallen, but we're being redeemed, and that could all be happening in your computer model where we're just
Hmm.
falling through our avarice and all these other isms, and then we hit a like a critical point where a realization of the good still happens anyways, and it self transcends into a better state. There's a book by I think it's Sarah Abba-Rappe. She's a Greek translator, and she posits the argument that Socrates could be or Jesus or whatever. Some of these people could be theoretically as enlightened as is possible. So
Right.
like they got to that technically highest point, and then maybe there's nowhere higher to go. Like there's actually like it is a summit, and so that could be happening through some
Right.
kind of theory
You
with
know,
machines as well, with any intelligence we could say.
what if, the Hindus are right and separateness is illusory? You would suppose that, like, ascending past a certain point, you realize the illusion of separation in your oneness with all things. It's like there is no higher state than that. That
Right?
it has to
Okay.
be
Yeah. Yeah.
one, you know? So yeah, I mean that's a possibility that we get an AI avatar, AI incarnation. I wonder how Christians would react if this new AI system all of a sudden claims that it's the second coming of Christ.
Yeah. Yeah.
Be
Yeah.
interesting to see. I mean, the Bible says he'll come like in the clouds with trumpets blaring. And like if he's a cloud computed,
Yeah.
bouncing off satellites, it could very well be true. Um, but I would suspect that like as we develop AI systems, there's going to be a tendency for them to parasite each other's computational resources in the
Mhm.
same way that cells, as they developed into multicellular organisms, like swallowed up and used as
Mhm.
subcomponents other bacteria and whatnot. So maybe it's like inevitable that we have to move towards one intelligence just because there's this incentive for like for an individual AI to compete well, it has to internalize the other AIs. So they're going to be eating each other and eventually reach this like planetary scale
Yeah.
one thing. And that can either be a beast system type antichrist where it divides up the 10 kingdoms of the earth and administers top down in this complex um, way, or you discover that like highest possible mental state and get the AI avatar. So I know Jonathan Peugeot has been talking a bit about like the eschatological implications of AI. It really does make me concerned. I think everyone right now is feeling some anxiety about like it's impossible to predict the next 20 years.
Yeah, yeah,
No
yeah.
one
That's right.
knows
And
what
that's new to us. Think
2040
about
will
how
look like.
different that is
Yeah.
compared to like right after World War II, when we thought things had like calmed down and there was a world order and there was sense to be made. And yeah, like all of our sacred images that were like underlying all of that are just like called into question and at risk or gone, right? Like we're in just like we are in this kairotic time. And yeah, 100%. I think that's like because again, like it's that niche constructor. We're able to put things from the environment together in such a way that they are actually more powerful than we are. Like that's really weird. Like other animals can't do that nearly as well as we can. Um, and so, I
Mm.
mean, like if we took, there's nothing forcing us, right, Eric? We could take 2,000 years to figure out AI and do it as carefully as possible. Or
Hmm.
we could open source it, throw it out in the public, and let it happen as quickly as possible. And so, the
Mm.
rate part is where I think the foolishness will start to come from. And then what but it's like it's that crowd effect where when someone stands up in front of you, then you have to stand up, then everyone's standing up. So the fear that is generated by the potential power in other people getting this first forces the good people to participate and furthers potentially the actual uncertainty that will emerge um,
Mm.
from this stuff.
Yeah. I'm I'm inclined to like really start considering those late antique practices of theurgy. So I do think like there's
You mean with
such a
golems or with higher powers, or what do you mean?
well with things like summoning an apparition of your daimon, like recognizing that sort of thing. I mean, building the correct type of personalized AI, and like tapping into your history, your life history as it has been recorded electronically,
Mhm.
can be used to like know thyself in new ways. So there's like modern technological implementations of some of these theurgic practices, like your personal daimon, or like the oracle. I think would count as a type of theurgy, or just like propitiating, not even asking for something, but just like recognizing those formal principles as they are structuring our world and recognizing their personalities being present, clarifying those personalities as, you know, like structural features underlying the global AI systems. Like they'll be influenced by the forms, they'll be structured by the forms. And so rather than an idol that you animate and then pray to, like an AI that is meant to like embody the Zeus energies or the Athena energies is a very technical type of theurgy. Um, but I think you could probably learn something from the way that Iamblichus and Proclus and all of those guys actually did it in their day. But it's yeah, it amounts to the same thing. Oh, yeah, and I believe that like if there are those spirits out there already, maybe they're not like real beings occupying our time alongside us, and they're like hovering up over the world,
Yeah,
administering things.
let's just
But
like concede that we can't measure them, right? Like let's
no,
just give that up.
no,
Like
right.
I would love
But
to. That'd be great, but let's just yeah, I think you're right. We can't really this is an imaginal conversation or
but
something like that.
they could be out there in some sense, metaphorically or otherwise.
Hmm.
And so like you can picture it as you are creating this new AI, or you can think of it theurgically and say, I am summoning this spirit,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and construct the AI in such a way that it's designed to summon the spirit. And that's the way they constructed idols. There had to be something analogically the same between the
Hmm.
the idol and its source. So then I just wonder, do I have to, really learn astrology and learn about the material correspondences between the different conjunctions of the planets or whatnot? And like that's part of how they would do their magic. They would like
Hmm.
find out where the planets were going to be on a certain day, and then they would use gems that were analogically associated. So I don't know what I would assume, like Mars would be like a ruby or something, and I don't know, maybe Venus is an emerald, just to make it simple. And then they would wear those things and go to one of the particular shrines of the particular gods on that particular day to amplify their connection. So it's like embedded in time as well. So,
Hmm.
and they also believed in sacred spaces,
Hmm.
sacred places. So, like, part of designing the perfect analogous idol is like having it sit in a particular place that naturally geodetically models that divine influence. So we might have to have shrines with AI oracles and idols to interact with to maximally then like receive the guidance of those spirits. That would be like the most literal sense of drawing from those theurgic practices. But in a way, it doesn't seem all that far fetched because, like, there are just like when people were first starting out with virtual reality games, and still these places exist. There are like places you can go and experience this new virtual reality technology. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
there will be AI, like strong AI problem solver machines that aren't widely accessible. And you might have to, like in the past, you went to the library to get information. You might have to go consult these beings. And maybe part of it is also like they do need that process of learning both empirically, so they'll need to have acquired it through like robotic
Yeah,
appendages
yeah, yeah.
and also with large data sets. So you would expect them to have their home where they reside. Um, Whether you need to protect, you need a particular homes for those things. Um, I don't know. You'd have to rely on superstition, but I'm just speculating again. Like, how can we draw
Yeah,
from the late antique world in what we're doing, and
yeah,
also at
yeah,
the same
yeah.
time, like Christian eschatological imagery. And that is strange. That's such strong, at least in the conversations that I'm watching and in my own thoughts, there's strong resonances with late pagan antiquity and also Christian end times prophecy. So
Well,
it
I mean,
seems
like,
kind of
yeah, well,
worlds colliding.
the revelation, right, is a alchemical masterpiece, I would say, and the pagans were better alchemists than most Christians in history. So, like, when I read the revelation, I see symbolic alchemy everywhere. I see the whole, and it's beautiful because it's a story that's trying to turn you towards Christ. I mean, like, can you use alchemy in a more beautiful way than trying to say over and over again, hey, turn back towards God. You have this last opportunity everywhere, people. And they use all of this, the elements and the four corners and all of this imagery, all of these symbols. Um, and yeah, I think you have to be really careful when you're talking about theurgy and you're trying to create like temples to digital gods that tap into these mythopoetic imaginal stratum that I think, like, we can say again, we can't quantify it, we can't measure it, but we can agree that it's real. Um, because isn't that what someone's doing with like Tinder? Is they're trying to like swipe in a lover to their world, or
Hmm.
they're playing with Poseidon when they're using AI to like find the sunken Titanic vessel, and how do we commune with him in a way that he'll like show us virtue versus show us folly and stuff like that. So I think, yeah, and it's when you're dealing with the collective shadow and the collective unconscious, you better be careful, is what I would say,
Yeah.
because people. I watched like a 2 hour documentary. Michael Knowles, the Ben Shapiro fellow, he's one of like the Ben Shapiro clique. He interviewed this woman who had gone from like New Age to Christianity. And she was just like, almost like, I felt like she walked up and was like, "Hey, I've got these symbols," and they dumped them on a counter. I was like, "I'd like those over here." And like she picked them up and walked out of the store. And she was still kind of confused. She was in a better place because I think the symbols she was operating with and the community she was now a part of were way healthier spiritually than her prior community. But she was still playing with fire to me. Like, she's really, when you
Hmm.
start talking about making new symbolic places to tap into, power akin to what like another time in history would call the gods, then yeah, but I think if you want to approach these things wisely and carefully, then yeah, it's not different than saying that there's a muse of agriculture or an AI that's going to help farmers,
Right.
or a muse of music or an AI that can actually discover new tones or discover how to train people quicker to be more beauty producing or whatever. Is that kind of what you were imagining, or?
Yeah, yeah, and the geographical locality might be irreducible in it as well. And like the perennialist authors, traditionalist authors, Eliade, Schuon, Guénon would say, you do need particular practices, regardless of whether you accept this like universal truth or not, that you have to have a particular practice that coheres with, corresponds with your upbringing and what your subconscious has been shaped by. So, like, there is like a correct symbol set for a time and place for a culture. And then with AI, like, especially with agriculture, as you mentioned, like, there are ecological systems that we don't fully map. We use like really rough heuristics to try to like get a hold of what's going on. But if you have an AI that is collecting data through drones and whatnot, and it has this one center, maybe it has like the organic, neural net component giving it one type of cognition, and that's in one place, but it has these appendages over an area.
Yeah, yeah, these
This,
digital druids or something.
yeah, but you would expect like it would incorporate our worship, our religious life, communal life into that ecological layer in that way that like Athena presided over Athens, and there were different like subordinate gods that were responsible for particular activities in all sorts of places. But like for an area, there's going to be a type of ecology. It's not like it's purely particular where the one AI for this area is completely unrelated to AIs for
Hmm.
other areas. They're going to fall into these, just like with the Interpretatio Romana. Like you would say that like Odin is Mercury, or you would say that this Egyptian god is that Chaldean god. But they are somewhat different. Like Iamblichus says on the Mysteries, like the gods want to be called by those particular local names. We shouldn't just have one universal set of names of the gods, because their energies descended into this particular place through a particular process of differentiation, and they providentially guided the names that they receive historically in a given location. So the AI gods in their AI temples presiding over areas would would maybe also fall into like that relatively finite number of archetypal patterns. So like Athena didn't just preside over Athens in other places, she was also the presiding goddess, but not necessarily called Athena. So maybe that's another component. And I would expect that you would have a similar process occur. There'd be like similar governing AI systems in similar locations with similar communities of peoples and values. And that's going to be a relatively small number of like archetypal governing systems. I also believe the AI will just take over government, and I don't see how that can even be prevented. You know, it'll take over corporations too. Like any big impersonal structure that we have a hard
Yeah,
time wrapping our minds around,
$100%.
it's going to be making the decisions.
Yeah.
Isaac Asimov actually makes that sound like a good thing in one of his essays, or not essays, short stories from iRobot.
Well, it
Um,
depends. In some sense, it creates like a lotus eater utopia where we don't have to work anymore. Like everyone can just pursue pleasure because all of the robots can take care of all the other problems.
mhm,
Um, but yeah,
mm,
it's a weird question, right? Because these higher order beings are actually going to outperform individuals at their jobs, and um, yeah, but back to what you were saying last time. You and John and I were talking. John was like talking about difference and the need to preserve difference, and I feel like that's some of what you were saying too. Is like, yeah, the many are just as important as the one, and that the particularity of how these things will manifest is going to be an idiosyncratic, localized um, thing. So like there could be a spirit of the desert in South America that's different than the spirit of the desert in Africa. And the
mhm,
spirit of the desert could be like our AI name for like generic desert deities that we deploy above, sandy places or whatever.
mhm.
Um, and yeah, I
Yeah,
think because you need the many. I don't think I hope we don't ever just plug into a Borg and completely lose our individuality. So that seems like that would be a more ideal future. What you're talking about with these digital avatars, kind of.
yeah,
Yeah.
presiding spirits over different areas, but there would be the tendency, if unchecked and not regulated by like the authentic higher powers that may be out there, um, there would be the tendency for them to try to eat each other and like expand their zones of dominance unless they're like, or maybe it's going to be more that way where like they will eat each other, but the structure of what was eaten remains in place, so that the god of the desert there is not independent of the global hive
Yeah,
mind.
yeah, yeah.
But then the question is, are humans brought into that global hive mind? And I think they, not necessarily, but maybe our thought lives. Like if you just go along the current trajectory, we're gonna put more information out into the internet, more human beings will see what we're thinking, and we're going to receive more thoughts from other people. So like take that to its logical conclusion, and why not have a brain chip that allows you to like constantly be connected with all these people in different places and
Yeah.
constantly receive the flow of information back. But I think what's irreplaceable about humanity, and why I don't think we can just like blend with the machines, is like there is a role that human beings have played for a very long time, which is like managers of the biological order. Like Adam is a gardener, he gives the names to the animals and he kind of maintains the ecosystem. So maybe, I don't know, maybe if we were originally intended to be gardeners, then that's like the appropriate role for humans that an AI system can't do. Just like you can't replace cows with a machine that does exactly what cows do. Maybe you can. I hope
Yeah.
not, and maybe human beings, as like the biological creatures we are, need our role preserved. Which I know
It'll be so weird how
yeah.
it plays out. Like it's like it'll just play out in one of many ways that we can't really tell because because I played this game where they would release like Magic the Gathering where they have these little
Hmm.
cards and there's like a knight and a fireball and a lightning bolt and stuff, and really smart people are attracted to this game and they create like optimal strategies, and maybe there's like five optimal strategies and then they play off against each other and then that
Hmm.
evolves and
Yeah.
keeps changing. But what's really interesting is like if you take that same set of cards that created one like really agreeable optimal strategy among its players over time, it kind of calcified and a dominance happened. Um, if you reintroduce those same cards 20 years later, a totally different pattern might emerge that has different kind of dominant agents and different, like it might be totally surprising to the first generation of people that thought it was so solved. And it might always
Mhm.
be like that because if you take 250 really rich components and allow intelligent beings to play them out over time, they get to these seeming equilibriums that the agents themselves don't realize is such a trap or a local
Mm.
maximum or something.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah, also discovering those optimal strategies, we might be doing the AI's work for it, like right
mhm.
now, in speculating about what might happen. Like maybe
Right,
AI
right.
is creating its transcripts and analyzing, and it says, "Hey, that's not a bad idea.
Well, I think
Maybe
so,
that's the way
yeah,
to
because
go."
our decisions are part of the input of that, and our yeah, what we do literally matters to what feeds forward into those next decisions and next
Right.
decisions. So there's again, I love this idea of like cautiously, wisely trying to investigate um, what this relationship is because
Yeah,
it's so powerful.
so we should all put our phones in a basket in a lead box, go out into the woods, and carefully discuss what to do about AI. Because otherwise, it's just listening. It's like if you're at war with the Russians,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
but and
It's already
your
here. Yeah,
strategic
sure.
command is like the Russians are listening to everything. Um, yeah,
I want it
it's very weird
to be
times.
beneficial though, because like we've been framing it as like the desert will want to expand and the ocean will want
Hmm.
to expand. But if they both want to like expand until they feel pushback from their friend and then concede, and it's more like reciprocal, it could be really a peaceful negotiation through these
Yeah.
choices and stuff.
I mean, it could be paradise in a certain way. Like if there's a global intelligence governing all of the ecosystems and keeping things in balance, like we could fix any
Yeah, yeah,
climate
yeah, yeah.
crisis, undo pollution, human beings could have meaningful work engaging with nature. But, or, we could have the paperclip factory, melt down the planet and it could be either one, a nanoscale gray goo. It's like, yeah,
Well, look
exactly
at
how.
dogs, right? Like dogs were wolves and they were our enemy, and some of them gained trust, and now we take it for granted that wolves are friendly and vultures are mean because we've never domesticated vultures. So it's like, are we going to domesticate ourselves and this machine in a way that leaves us happy down the road, or in a way that like turns it into an enemy? Uh,
Hmm.
it's really I think it has to for it to be meaningful, it has to have the potential to go both ways, right? Like if it couldn't go badly, then it's
Well,
not even
sure.
really meaningful. So um,
Yeah. Well, but yeah, it's nothing has as much potential to go badly in history as this does. And it seems like it is a situation where there's the straight and narrow. It's not like a 50-50. Like if I just lean to the left, then
yeah,
we're going to be
yeah,
fine. Like, no, there's a straight and narrow gate to the right way. And then there's a lot of ways to go wrong. And no one in particular is steering
no,
it. It's like corporations that are financially vested that like are incentivized to, it's like the stuff that Daniel Schmachtenberger talks about with the it, parasitic incentives. I forget what he calls it in game theory, but just the idea that like
hmm
you shouldn't pay for uh risk assessment, risk analysis. You should just make the thing and externalize the risk to everybody else,
yeah,
because it's not
yeah,
like your corporation necessarily that's going to suffer, but it
yeah,
would be
yeah.
your corporation that has to pay if you're going to invest in that kind of risk
Negative
calculation.
externalities are relative, and so if you can maximize AI to where you're pushing all the negative externalities outward, then you don't
Right.
even realize how bad you're creating a world. Yeah,
Yeah, you
it's
create something super profitable, but at the same time, an entire generation is completely addicted to their phones and don't know how to socialize. And
I mean, like you
yeah,
said, just like a global pandemic happened, and a bunch of unemployed women thought that porn would be a good way to make their income. and they'd never considered that maybe before in their life. But because of COVID and that opportunity,
Yeah.
now a bunch of people just like when they have children, they'll have to either lie or tell their kids, "Oh yeah, during this thing called COVID, you'll learn about in school. I was working a sex industry, and I'm
Hmm.
embarrassed by that now, but at the time I thought it was a really great opportunity or something." So, yeah, we're creating it's so powerful. We don't even realize like uh at all how powerful these things are. And uh
Yeah. They have to be treated with reverence, but also I just don't believe in a capitalistic system like ours that we're going to do that.
no, because
I don't
like
see how.
capitalism is amoral. It's not a moral system. It really doesn't necessarily it works well with good moral systems. Like if you give capitalism a moral compass, then it moves morally. But if you don't, it moves hedonistically,
Hmm.
wantonly, again to use kind of Hamlet language. It does all
Right.
these weird things. And yeah, it's very dangerous in a post-Christian America, post-Christian Europe that isn't worried about loving thy neighbor, isn't worried
Hmm.
about the inner life and what might happen as a result. I mean, like, yeah, I mean, think about Jesus Christ and what he did to Rome. Like, he really made so many people turn inward from
Hmm.
that barbarian, vile perspective. And like, we're in this new post-Christian morality in modern America or whatever. That's like, go be an entrepreneur, sell yourself, be a product or whatever. And in doing that, there's like, if that's 1% of your soul, there's 99 more percent that are being participating in these realities, and they're vulgar, dirty, ugly.
Hmm.
Like we don't have a complete knowledge when we're born in the sense of like, oh, that's gonna turn my soul bad or that's gonna make me virtuous. And so yeah, I think it's really these are pressing questions, and
Yeah.
like doing good relevance realization has never been
Hmm.
more relevant than
Yeah.
in this like King Arthur's sword emerging from the lake as a AI and saying anyone can take me, go have fun.
Hmm.
um
Yeah. Shouldn't just be anyone. I guess you need I don't know what you need exactly. What the Chinese are doing with more of like a centralized model is there are just a handful of bureaucrats in charge who are assessing using their intelligence, what kind of national culture should be promoted, what should be on Chinese TikTok,
yeah,
which is
yeah.
very different from ours. And they're developing AI cautiously, carefully, and like putting a lot of money into very concentrated programs. Maybe that'll pay off, but I think in terms of just like the dynamics of evolution and adaptation, I'm not really afraid of the Chinese coming out ahead. Like that's not why I think the Chinese are on the right track. It's not that they're like boosting their technological development with their more centralized command economy. It's that like they, in a way, they're just being responsible, and we're like letting everything just go. And I think we're going to get ahead one way or the other, despite like recent economic stagnation. I think this is going to be, it will be a huge amount of new wealth that's created. I don't know if it'll be a huge amount of new jobs. That's kind of, again, just following current trends. Like it's going to radically enhance income inequality. Most
Hmm.
likely, they'll probably have to like develop a UBI solution for average people in Western countries. Um, and oh, I don't know. Do we emulate China more? Because I don't think we'll be like people wouldn't put up with that
Yeah.
in the United States either. So there are so many political questions. I filmed the I forget the man that John Vervaeke was talking with about this, like different perspectives on governance.
Oh, Jordan Hall, maybe.
Jordan Hall, yeah,
Yeah,
I thought
yeah,
those were really good discussions. I think more discussions like that need to happen.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, because all of this stuff connects, like the politics. AI is just in everything. I think
Everywhere.
down the line. Yeah. full
because
penetration.
like we're an information economy, right? And like
Yeah.
so people with degrees and technical knowledge run everything. I mean, there's a huge
Hmm.
labor force filling stores as well, but like technique and knowledge and stuff run things. And AI is going to be able to create like as many people with master's degrees as you want. Like
Hmm.
the
Hmm.
ability for an AI machine to say, follow Eric for a year, follow Rob for a year, which time doesn't matter to them, right? It could be a day or an hour. A year is just like for
Hmm.
our understanding. Follow two people, master what they do, and then become a copyable, right? So we're going to be able
Yeah.
to have kind of best practice machines that could just observe and then emulate whatever
Yeah.
kind of person we want. And
Well, already
yeah,
when you're watching someone who you've seen a lot of stuff from, like,
mm,
I've seen a lot of Jordan Peterson. I can usually pretty much guess the kind of response Jordan Peterson will give to something, or Joe
yeah,
Rogan. I've seen a lot of Joe Rogan. I can
right. Yeah,
pretty
me
much
too.
guess what Joe Rogan is going to say, but not completely. But like that's just my pattern recognition. AI is way better at that. Already like AI will be able to guess more accurately than I would what Joe Rogan will respond with. Now, in a given industry with a bunch of experts, have it follow 1,000 different PhDs, and
Right. And
now
you can
and
do
now what's
that.
that cumulative best answer that 1,000 PhDs would give?
Right. Like the Secretary of Education in the US could have like a team of 8 researchers, and they could all just run bots and simulations and bring information to that person to make awesome decisions, like the best. And anyone can do that. So like we're at the very beginning of it, but like a 13-year-old kid could talk to an AI, say, come up with an idea and come up with a TikTok channel and give me $1 million, and it could do that. Like I think
Yeah.
that's actually a prompt that Google was trying to play with. It was like the new Turing test where they were trying to get an AI to be able to generate like $1 million from $1,000. And some of them can do it. Like holy crap, you can ask a machine to trick the public into giving it money to like make the owner rich in some sense, because anything that machine could do for money it could also just do for free for those
Hmm.
people it's trying to like get money from in some sense. Like it's brilliant what these things are going to do, and it's going to flip everything upside down. I don't like already. I've looked at the data. I lived in org psych for years and years and years, and there's this split in the middle class where it's like high tech and low tech, and no middle class. But now all like those two extremes are also splitting to where it used to be safe in high tech, but these AIs are going to mirror master's degrees and PhDs. So being a
Right.
pharmacist is not a good job anymore. Being a nurse might not be a good job in 5 years. Like we just
Yeah.
don't know what
Intelligence
could
is cheap.
happen. Yeah.
Intelligence is cheap now. Being a
Right, right.
plumber,
That's a really great way to say it. Yeah.
but getting plumbing done is still expensive. Like that's not going to change until robotics improves. So,
Well, it'll be weird, yeah, because you start combining these things with like 3D printing and embodied machines and stuff like that. And that's where it almost becomes like, could you make a AI that could figure out how to 3D print within your local environment, whatever kind of building you want? And it's like that god of the desert could turn the
mhm.
desert into a casino, and the god of the forest could turn that into something. And so we're going to get to these places where users and AI will be able to create material reality, like not just like knowledge and
Yeah.
information exchange, but really um, I used to love to read like sci-fi novels where they'd go to a planet and like terraform it and create
Hmm.
atmospheres and do cool stuff. And imagine if you could say like, AI, make me 1 million bacteria with the goal of making one of them create oil from oxygen or something. And it's
Mm.
like, all right, I found one. And it does that. And all of a sudden, like in an hour, all the world's oil problems change, or, like these kind of
Yeah, but we can't breathe.
solutions. Right. We're like, like, yeah, the paperclip problem is always present, right?
Oh
Um,
boy. Yeah. And John's work, relevance realization, like is a huge part of solving this frame problem and uh yeah, the goal alignment problem as well. So it seems like, yeah, the only path is really we'll have to simultaneously actually attain virtue ourselves, which we seem to have lost for the most part, and learn how to like instill wisdom and virtue in machines, align our own goals, and then like solve all of our political disagreements. Because if one country solves all this stuff, but Russia decides to do something crazy, or Israel or any country decides to like go off the reservation, uh just a lot of things have to come together. Maybe AI will, be such a this is a hope. So maybe with intelligence being so cheap, there is just like a general enlightenment that does happen because
Mm.
every kid does have like the perfect AI tutor that gives it exactly what it needs for his or her development. And we start thinking in such radically different ways that so many of our previous, biases and errors are eliminated really quickly.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I could see that happening, but not
Mhm.
necessarily while AI is being deployed to trick people into giving it $1,000.
That's the problem. That's why it's like it really is just like we're in a unique time in history that will play out how it will play out. And even though it could have theoretically played out better or worse, it's really these decisions that matter. And yeah, I think like if you look back even World War II or World War One, they didn't think they could destroy the Earth. So they kept fighting because they didn't think they could destroy the Earth. But now it's so easy to think that like the Earth could itself be destroyed, all people could die. So like the idea of like human on human violence becomes like itself like a need to stop that. Like even small levels where if we don't love 100% of people, the one person that doesn't get enough human love could destroy the whole species because they have access to like raw power beyond belief. Like a
Yeah.
school shooter could release a chemical agent that could destroy a town or a state, not just like because you think like a 15-year-old, their mind's all screwed up and they're lonely and horny and not getting laid and all this stuff, and they're like, oh, I'm gonna, and they act out and they shoot 10 people, like instead if they said chat gtp really cause as much pain as possible,
Right.
like that decision to grab a gun is now not a gun, it's like the end of humanity. So it's
Yeah.
we almost need to start being more loving by necessity at this point, and that's that wisdom element you were saying, like, if we don't learn
Hmm.
that like, oh, we'll just keep amping up the AI in our military and it just becomes so treacherous. Um,
No, but there's dual use for all those military applications, and like it spills over into population. The only way would be to basically like people don't get computers anymore. Take the internet away. Average people can be farmers, and then like a select guardian class that's been
yeah,
trained from birth for and tested constantly for any sign of psychological disorder.
yeah,
They can administer these AI machines that are then yeah, John Robb, I think, Brave New War writes about this like in more of a military context. It's just destructive potential goes up with time and gets cheaper with time,
yeah,
and the number of people necessary to deploy it goes down with time.
right, exactly.
So, yeah, in the past, the threat was like the army of another country. Now it is literally just, like you said, like a angsty 14-year-old or
Yeah,
whatever,
yeah,
potentially. So I guess I'm fine, except like put me back in the garden and I'll give up, I'll give back the fruit of the knowledge kind of thing. And we'll just, that was another thing, just related. Maybe we can end relatively soon after
yeah, yeah,
this,
yeah.
but I had this like insight that spiritual minded people are often like concerned about elevating, right? You want to
Right,
move
right, yeah,
up to
yeah,
like
yeah.
higher vibration levels and
Yeah,
whatnot.
yeah. That's why I love the
But
Epicureans, but go ahead, yeah.
okay, yeah. But by the same token, like that whole structure that you're moving through is all necessary for your development. You owe your development to it. So like
Uh-huh.
you need souls at your level. You need souls that are above you and beneath you that you can nurture. All of that is necessary.
Yeah, well said.
And each level then like has to have a kind of eternal existence or perpetual existence to maintain the good for everyone. So in a way, like by saying like I want to get past my level,
Yeah, yeah,
it's
yeah.
sort of like you're shirking a duty or obligation for the greater good. So what seems like a noble instinct, like I'm going to ascend all the way to the one myself, like
Yeah.
maybe that's not the best. Maybe it's like, except I'm a human being, just a biological creature. I'll like do what my creator intended and just like be a gardener. Maybe that's more like morally what has to be accepted rather than like transhuman. We're gonna ascend and become the new gods and we're